My name is Margaret, and I used to believe that being alone automatically meant being lonely. I believed it because the world teaches us that loneliness is something to fear. It teaches us that if you sit by yourself, something must be wrong, that you must be waiting for someone, that you must be missing someone, that you must be incomplete. But there came a day when I sat alone in a cafe and realized I wasn't lonely at all. It was a calm morning, the kind where the light feels soft and patient. I had woken up early, as I always do, and sat by my window with tea warming my hands. The street outside was beginning to wake up too. A few people walking, a distant car passing, the sky slowly brightening into a new day. Inside my home, everything was quiet. Not sad quiet, just still. Stillness has become familiar to me over the years. Some mornings it feels like peace. Other mornings it feels like the world has moved on without me. That morning, it was somewhere in between. I have been thinking about loneliness lately, not because I don't have people. I do. I have children who love me. I have a grandson who visits. I have neighbors who smile. But there are still moments when you feel separate from the world, like you are watching life through glass instead of living inside it. And I realized something simple. I needed to go somewhere. Not somewhere exciting, not somewhere busy, just somewhere that reminded me I still belonged to the world outside my walls. Somewhere I could sit quietly without the pressure of conversation, but with the comfort of being around other humans. So I picked up my small handbag and put on my cardigan. I brushed my silver hair neatly and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was older, of course, gentle, deep wrinkles, softer cheeks, the marks of time. But my eyes were still mine. They still carried the same curiosity I had as a young woman, even if life had made that curiosity quieter. I stepped outside and felt the cool air on my skin. The morning was crisp, but not harsh. It smelled faintly like bread and coffee from somewhere nearby. I walked slowly down the street, letting my pace match my body's rhythm. At 72, you learn not to fight your own pace. You learn that moving slowly doesn't mean you are failing. It means you are listening. The cafe wasn't far, a small place on the corner that I had passed many times but rarely entered. It had warm light inside and a simple sign, nothing fancy, just the kind of place people stop at when they want a small comfort in the middle of their day. When I walked in, the smell greeted me immediately. Coffee, pastries, warmth. It reminded me of mornings long ago when my kitchen was full of noise and movement, when children ran around with messy hair, when I packed lunches and poured milk and tried to keep life organized. The cafe was not crowded, but it wasn't empty either. There were a few people scattered around, a young couple talking softly, a woman typing on a laptop, an older man reading the newspaper. The barista behind the counter moved calmly, wiping surfaces, preparing drinks. I approached the counter and ordered something simple, tea and a small cookie. My voice came out quiet, but the barista smiled kindly, as if my presence mattered. I paid, took my cup carefully, and looked around for a place to sit. There were tables in the center, but I chose the one near the window. I like windows. Windows let you feel connected without having to perform. You can watch the world and still remain yourself. I sat down and placed my cup on the table. The chair was comfortable, the table clean, the light warm. Outside the window, people passed by without noticing me, and strangely, that didn't hurt. It felt peaceful, like I didn't need to be noticed to still be part of life. For a moment, I simply sat, hands around my cup, eyes drifting between the cafe and the street outside, and then something familiar crept in, a slight embarrassment. I looked around and realized I was the only person sitting alone without something obvious to do. Everyone else had a purpose. The woman had her laptop, the older man had his newspaper, the couple had each other. I had only my tea. I felt a quick sting of insecurity, the kind that whispers, "People are looking at you. They're wondering why you're alone. They're thinking you're lonely." I almost reached for my phone just to look busy, just to appear as if I belonged. It's strange, isn't it? Even at my age, there is still a part of me that wants to prove I have a reason for being somewhere. But then I stopped myself. Why do I need to prove anything? I took a slow sip of tea and let the warmth spread through me. I listened to the soft sounds around me, cups clinking, distant conversation, the low hum of the coffee machine. And in that listening, I felt something settle. I wasn't lonely. I was simply alone. And those are not the same thing. As I watched the cafe life move gently around me, I began to understand something deeper. Loneliness isn't about empty chairs around you. Loneliness is about feeling unseen inside yourself. And that morning, sitting there with tea and warm light, I felt more seen than I had in days. Not by other people, by me. And that realization surprised me, because for most of my life, I believed being seen had to come from someone else, a husband noticing you, children thanking you, friends calling you, a room full of voices acknowledging your presence. I thought that was the only way the heart could feel full. But sitting there in the cafe, I understood that there is another kind of seeing, self-seeing. It is when you stop looking at your life through other people's eyes and finally look at it through your own. It is when you stop asking, "Am I wanted?" and start asking, "Am I at peace?" I watched a young woman at the table across from me laugh quietly at something on her phone. I watched the older man turn a newspaper page slowly, the paper making that soft crackling sound. I watched the barista place a warm pastry on a plate and slide it toward a customer with a polite smile. Ordinary things, simple moments, and yet I felt touched by them. Because when you are alone in the right way, the world becomes clearer. I took another sip of tea and let my shoulders relax. Then I looked down at my hands on the cup. They were old hands, of course, wrinkles, veins, small marks of time. And instead of feeling sadness, I felt an unexpected tenderness. These hands have lived. They have made meals for others and held children and cleaned homes. They have gripped steering wheels, folded laundry, paid bills, wiped tears. They have been useful, yes, but they have also been gentle. They have been loving. They have been brave. And now they were holding tea in a quiet cafe belonging to an older woman who was still learning something new. For a moment, I closed my eyes and listened, not just to the cafe, but to my own thoughts. I noticed how much my mind used to race, even in silence. It used to replay regrets, worry about tomorrow, chase memories like they were unfinished business. But now it felt calmer, as if my body understood that I was safe. That is what peace feels like. Not excitement, not loud happiness, just safety. I opened my eyes again and watched the street outside. Cars passed, people walked by in coats. A mother pushed a stroller. A teenager hurried along with headphones, moving as if time were chasing him. They all looked so busy, so full of urgency, and I realized that for years I had lived like that too, always rushing, always serving, always worrying. And in the middle of it, I rarely asked myself whether I was happy. I only asked whether I was needed, whether I was doing enough, whether I was being good. But now, at 72, sitting alone in a cafe with tea, I was finally allowing myself to simply exist. And existing felt beautiful. A small sound pulled me back, the chair beside me scraping gently as someone moved. I turned slightly. A woman about my daughter's age had sat at the table near mine. She placed a small notebook down and began writing. She looked tired but determined, the way people look when they are trying to hold themselves together. For some reason, her presence made me feel protective, not in an interfering way, but in a human way. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to prove anything, that rest is not failure, that she is allowed to breathe. But I didn't say anything. I simply watched her for a moment, then turned back to my tea, because sometimes the best kindness is letting people have their private space. Still, seeing her reminded me of myself when I was younger. I used to carry notebooks too. Lists, reminders, responsibilities. My life was full of paper and tasks, and if someone had asked me to sit alone in a cafe back then, I would have called it a waste of time. Now I understood that time is not wasted when it heals you. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my own small notebook. I hadn't planned to write, but I felt inspired. The notebook was simple, nothing fancy, but the pages were clean and open, like a quiet invitation. I wrote one sentence. Today, I sat alone and felt peace. I stared at the sentence after I wrote it. It looked small on the page, but inside my chest it felt big. Then I wrote another sentence. Loneliness is not the same as solitude. As I wrote, I realized something else too. I wasn't only learning to be alone, I was learning to enjoy my own company. That might sound strange, but many people don't know how to do that. Many people only feel comfortable when someone is talking, when someone is validating them, when someone is making them feel chosen. I had lived much of my life that way too. I didn't admit it, but I depended on being needed to feel valuable. Being needed made me feel like I earned my place. But sitting there, I felt valuable without doing anything at all. The barista worked past and smiled at me briefly. Not a deep moment, just a simple smile, but it felt like a gentle acknowledgement. You belong here too. I smiled back. That small exchange warmed me. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about family. It wasn't even about friendship. It was about human connection in its simplest form. A few minutes later, the barista returned to my table with a small cookie on a plate. She said, "I made an extra. Would you like it?" I blinked. "Oh," I said, "that's very kind, but you don't have to." She shrugged gently. "I want to," she said, and set it down. Her kindness wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, natural. The kind of kindness the world still has, even when people say it doesn't. I felt tears rise unexpectedly. Not sad tears, grateful ones, the kind that arrive when you realize life still holds softness. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded and walked away without making it awkward. I stared at the cookie for a moment, then laughed quietly at myself. Here I was, an elderly woman in a cafe, nearly crying over a cookie. But it wasn't the cookie, it was what it represented. It represented that even when you are alone, you are not invisible. You are still part of the world's warmth. As I finished my tea, I glanced around the cafe again. The couple was still talking softly, the older man still reading, the woman still writing. People existed together, separate but connected by shared space. And I realized something tender. I didn't come here to escape loneliness. I came here to remember myself. And I came here to remember myself because somewhere in the middle of giving to everyone else, I had forgotten that I was also someone worth sitting with. I had forgotten that I deserved my own attention, that I deserved my own tenderness. And that morning in that cafe, I was quietly returning to myself. I stayed longer than I planned, not because I was waiting for someone, but because I enjoyed the simple comfort of being there. I watched the steam rise from other people's cups. I listened to the soft rhythm of conversation, the gentle clink of spoons, the distant sound of the coffee machine. The cafe felt like a small living room shared by strangers, each person carrying their own story, their own worries, their own hopes. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel separate. I felt included in life again. At one point, the older man reading the newspaper looked up and noticed me. He gave me a polite nod, the kind older people give each other without words. The nod was small, but it felt meaningful. It said, "I see you. We are both here. We both understand what it means to be quiet." I nodded back. That silent moment made me smile because it reminded me of something I hadn't considered before. Not all connections require conversation. Sometimes connection is simply shared presence. Two human beings existing near each other with respect. Eventually, the cafe began to fill. More voices, more footsteps, more warmth. And I realized that I didn't need to stay any longer to prove my new lesson. The lesson had already settled inside me. So I stood up slowly, gathered my handbag, and put on my cardigan. Before leaving, I looked around once more. I didn't know anyone there, and yet I felt grateful to all of them, the couple, the writer, the barista, the older man, because they had unknowingly given me something. They had given me a place to be. As I stepped outside, the air felt cooler and the street felt brighter. I began walking home at my slow pace, but my heart felt lighter than it had in the morning. The world looked softer. Even the ordinary things, a passing car, a bird on a wire, sunlight on shop windows, felt like they had meaning. Because when your heart is calm, everything becomes more visible. Halfway home, I passed a small flower stand, the kind that appears only on certain mornings, with simple bouquets laid out in buckets. I stopped without planning to. I leaned slightly closer and breathed in the scent, fresh, clean, alive. My fingers hovered over the petals as if I needed to remind my body that beauty is still here. I bought a small bouquet, nothing expensive, just something bright to place in my home, a quiet celebration of the fact that I had stepped out into life. When I reached home, I placed the flowers in water and set them on my table where the sunlight could reach them. Then I made myself another cup of tea and sat down by the window, my familiar place. But something was different. The quiet in my home no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like chosen peace. I watched the flowers sway slightly in the breeze coming from the window, and I thought about all the years I feared loneliness. I feared it when my children moved away. I feared it when my husband passed. I feared it when the house became quieter than I ever imagined. I feared the silence because I thought silence meant life was ending. But perhaps silence is not always an ending. Sometimes it is a space where you hear yourself again, a space where you remember what you like, what you need, what you feel, a space where you meet yourself without distractions. I realized then that loneliness is not the same as being alone. Loneliness is when you feel abandoned, unseen, unwanted. But being alone can also be healing. It can be restful. It can be sacred. It can be a gentle friendship with your own soul. In my younger years, I never understood that. I thought being alone meant failure, that it meant I wasn't loved enough, wanted enough. I chased noise because I thought noise was proof I mattered. But now I knew better. I mattered even in quiet. I mattered even without an audience. I mattered even when I wasn't doing anything at all. And I realized something else, too, something I wish every person could learn before life forces them to. You don't have to wait for someone to fill your emptiness. You can learn to fill it with peace. You can learn to sit with yourself and feel safe. You can learn to listen to your own thoughts without fear. That day, the café taught me that I wasn't lonely, not because strangers surrounded me, but because I finally understood that my own presence was enough. My own company was not something to escape, it was something to appreciate. If you are listening to my story right now, I want to tell you this gently. If you ever find yourself alone, don't immediately assume you are lonely. Take a breath. Look around. Notice the small details. Notice the warmth in your cup, the light through a window, the quiet beauty in ordinary things. And most of all, notice yourself, because you are still here. You are still alive. You are still someone worth caring for. That evening, I sat by my window with tea, the small bouquet bright on my table, and I watched the last lights soften across the street. My silver hair caught the warm glow, and my face, with all its gentle wrinkles and time, felt peaceful. I let a gentle smile rest on my lips, because that day I sat alone in a café and realized I wasn't lonely at all.